book is difficult to do in 25 words or less, as you're going to see when I start talking about it, but essentially it's about race, disillusionment, and the 40 years since between 1968 and 2008. It's kind of bookended by the assassination of Martin Luther King and a fictional election day plot to assassinate Barack Obama in 2008. The motivation for this book was a number of things, but I think chiefly the thing that I want to deal with was sort of what I see as the absurdity of modern American political discourse. There's just a craziness, there's a madness, that if it weren't real, you'd think it was almost a parody. Just in the way that we talk about the great issues of our time, race being one of them. When you've got, for instance, I believe it was Chris Christie declaring that Black Lives Matter is a terrorist group, I believe was his quote. There's just something, I don't know if it's something in the water, I don't know if we're smoking or breathing something, but there's some craziness in this country at this time. So that was one of the things that I want to deal with, just how far we've moved from anything that makes any kind of sense with regard to talking about race. I hope they walk away thinking about these issues of race and what we can do to make our country a lot healthier than it is with regard to the subject of race. As far as how did I come to be here, my publisher gave me a list of places and said, go here. I mean, it's really not that difficult. They set up the tour, and it's my responsibility to get from place to place. So.
And how has your tour been going and your book sales?
It's been, sales, I haven't seen any numbers. I mean, it's way too early, but as far as how the tour's been going great. I've already got Atlanta, what is under my belt? Atlanta, Chicago, Wichita, Kansas City, Austin, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. I'm in the greater Detroit area now. I will next be in Seattle and Spokane. That's next week, and then the following week I will be in New Orleans, Jackson, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee, and Miami, Florida. Thank you. Thank you. Evening, everybody. How are we doing? Good. I want to spend a few moments talking about Grant Park, and I'll read you a couple of excerpts from the book, and then maybe we can have a Q&A, if that's okay. If anybody's there, yeah, I see some nods. Okay, that sounds like a good idea then. Sounds like a plan. My novel, Grant Park, the gentleman back there on the camera was asking me a few minutes ago, and several people have asked me since I came in, to describe the book, and it's kind of weird because it's one of those books that defies an easy 25 words or less description. So if you let me take my time with it, I'm going to sort of try to lay out for you what this book is about and what it's going for. I guess if there was a short answer, it would be that it's a book about that's bookended by the assassination of Martin Luther King and a fictional attempted assassination of President-elect Obama. But there's a lot more that's going on. That's what I want to talk to you about. This is a book about race and also about disillusionment. It is about the sense that some of us have, and I know I'm one of them, and I suspect I'm not alone, that over the course of the decades since the civil rights years ended, since the civil rights movement ended, we have kind of lost our way, that a lot of the promise of that era has been lost to us, that we have not gone to where it was that we thought we would be going, the election of President Obama notwithstanding. I remember a lot of people were talking and speculating at that moment whether or not we had entered a post-racial era, and everything that we have seen since then, particularly some of the invective leveled at the president, suggests that what we actually entered is a most racial era that many of us have seen in a very long time. When a member of the board of directors of the NRA is referring to the president as a subhuman mongrel, and when you actually have learned discussion on cable channels about whether a birth certificate is a birth certificate, something's wrong. Something's gone haywire. And this is not where I thought we would be, frankly, when I was a child growing up in the 70s. I was part of the first generation of African American kids to grow up in the post-civil rights era. And one of the things that meant for me was that I thought, my contemporaries thought that, racial progress was something that we could take for granted. The civil rights generation had done this tremendous amount of work so that, kids like us could live in a world where we were not hemmed in by whites only signs or hemmed in by, some of the more obvious markers of racial discrimination that they had grown up with. For us, race, for me at least, race was something small enough that it could be laughed at. You have to remember, as a child of the 70s, race was Archie Bunker on All in the Family and George Jefferson on the Jeffersons. I've been telling this story a lot, but it sort of epitomizes, what I thought of race back in that era. I used to work at the University of Southern California bookstore, and I had a friend, a young white woman named Kathy. And one day while we were at work at the information counter at the bookstore, this guy walks in, this white guy, and he's scowling at everything. And he has on a T-shirt that says "White Power." And what happened next was just like a comedy routine. It was so smooth, the way that we executed it. Kathy sits down on a stool. She pats her lap. I sit on her lap. She kisses me on the lips, and she says, "What time will you be home for dinner tonight, honey?" And Mr. White Power changes like multiple shades. And he gives us this most evil scowl, a scowl that could kill plant life, and he walks out of the room. But that's how we regarded race back then, or racism back then. It's something that you could just sort of laugh at. And what has happened for me, at least, and I think what's happened for a lot of us who came of age in the 60s and the 70s, is a realization of just how premature our Declaration of Victory was. Just how naive we actually were. I actually was. I'm amazed to have gone from that era to an era where I have to explain to Chris Christie that Black Lives Matter is not a terrorist movement. To have gone from that era to an era where the Voting Rights Act, which was the crown jewel of the civil rights years, lies in ruins because it worked. I mean, that's the logic that the Supreme Court gave, and I hear that and I always wonder what would they have said if it hadn't worked. I find myself just astonished to have come of age, again, as I said, in an era where we've got the first African-American president, and some people still have difficulty with that. Some people still have, and they have disagreement, they have anger with him that has nothing to do with his policy. You can argue about his policy, you can argue about his positions, you can argue about, but the whole idea of was he born in the USA, and the whole idea of a sign at a Tea Party rally reading "Death to Michelle and Barack and their two stupid kids." That's not about policy. That's about something a whole lot deeper. So, I like a lot of people, I think, I'm just sort of disillusioned in a lot of ways, not surrendering, but definitely disillusioned by the loss of the progress that I thought we'd made. And that's the problem that my two characters face. Unlike me, my character's a little bit older than me, so unlike me, they did not come of age after the civil rights years. They're right in the thick of it. And I want to talk to you a little bit about each of them in 1968, where the book begins, and in 2008, where the book sort of ping-pongs back and forth between those two eras. In 1968, Malcolm Marcus Toussaint is a young black man. He's a gifted student who has gone to school on a full scholarship. Now, he wasn't born Malcolm Marcus Toussaint. I guess I should establish that because somebody's going to ask me. He was actually born Moselle Uriah Wilson Jr. Yeah, he didn't like that name either. He felt that name was entirely not befitting a young revolutionary black man of the 1960s. Nobody remembers that, huh? Okay, I'm the only one. Thank you. He didn't feel that befits a young revolutionary black man of the 1960s, so he changes his name, and he chooses the names of three, what he describes as three revolutionaries. So he's Malcolm for Malcolm X, he's Marcus for Marcus Garvey, and he is Toussaint for Toussaint Louverture, the Haitian general. And we meet Malcolm Marcus Toussaint coming home on the bus from this prestigious college to which he's been given a full scholarship, and he's on academic suspension. And he's not on academic suspension because he couldn't keep up with the work. In point of fact, he never bothered to do the work. I'm at the white man's school learning the white man's lessons. I'd rather, what does this do to achieve freedom? So he's more involved with protests. He's more involved with marking graffiti on the walls, protest graffiti on the walls. He's more involved with that. And it's not the civil rights movement of the early 60s, not those tactics. His is a more angry and more confrontational tone. Like a lot of young men in the late 60s, black, white, and otherwise, he doesn't have a whole lot of patience with the whole idea of linking arms and singing "We Shall Overcome." He doesn't have a whole lot of patience with the idea of passive resistance or engagement with people. He doesn't have a whole lot of patience with the idea of legislative solutions. He wants justice now. And like a lot of impatient young men of that era, if he cannot get justice now, if he cannot get what it is that he's seeking, then he is perfectly willing to do what it takes to get your attention. If that means break a window, break a window. If that means set a fire, set a fire. If that means, whatever it takes, I want you to pay attention to this. Black power, freedom now. So Malcolm returns to Memphis, and Memphis at that time is in the midst of a sanitation worker strike. And his father's one of the sanitation men. Now, the sanitation workers, a lot of people don't remember what was at issue in that strike. The sanitation men of Memphis were predominantly African American, and they were working under hellish conditions. They were working for something like on a low end of about 80 cents an hour, and the high end goes to maybe $1.50, $1.60 an hour. I always say, for the benefit of young people in the audience, because I'm sure they say, well, 80 cents an hour back in 1968, you could probably buy a house on that. Nope. Even in 1968, 80 cents didn't go very far. So they're working on, they're working for basically nothing. They're working under conditions where you're in a situation where you get in and you actually put in 14 hours of work, but you're only paid for 8 hours. And they're also working under just incredibly filthy conditions. The sanitation workers in Memphis at that time, unlike what happens today, today you put your trash out to the curb and the truck comes by and picks it up. In Memphis at that time, you had a metal tub, and you put the metal tub out in your backyard, and it was the responsibility of the sanitation men to go back out there and get it. And there was no restriction on what you could put in there. You put a dead cat in there, you put chicken bones in there, you put your cigarette, coffee grinds, whatever in there. And after a while, as you would expect, a metal tub, it rusts through. So the men lift these tubs, and they're lifting them like this, and all this garbage or whatever is sluicing down on them, and they have to carry it out to the trucks. And they used to call them walking vultures. And they smelled so bad after a shift that they couldn't take public transit. They tried to take public transit and get kicked off the bus because nobody wanted to be near them. So you have to walk home from this filthy job. And then there was the issue of safety. The trucks were old and poorly maintained. And there was one truck in particular that they had complained about for a long time. Nobody had done anything about it. And on a rainy day in February of 1968, the truck malfunctioned. Two of the drivers had climbed into the back to get in out of the rain, and the hydraulic ram started up that crushes the garbage. And these two men were crushed like the garbage that they hauled. One of these poor guys almost made it out, but his raincoat was snagged, and he was pulled back in. So this is what starts a wildcat strike. The men have no union, they have no anything, but they're like, we can't deal with this anymore. So they head out on this wildcat strike. And it's a strike for economic parity. It's a strike for basic dignity. They're tired of being called names and demeaned racially. And it's a strike for their safety. And it's all sort of epitomized by the sign that they carried, "I am a man." Some of you may have remembered seeing that iconic sign. So as I said, Malcolm's father is one of the sanitation men. Malcolm gets home and finds his father in the midst of this and the city in the midst of this. And he is entirely impatient with and scornful of this whole idea of marching around downtown with "I am a man" signs. Freedom now, change something now. So it comes to a head for him the night that, or the day that Martin Luther King comes to town to have a march in support of the sanitation men. Those of you who remember your history will recall that this was the last march that Dr. King ever led, and it was the only march that ever ended in violence. And in my fiction, in Grant Park, Malcolm is one of the main architects of that violence. Malcolm is right there in the middle of the riot. And this has unforeseen and tragic consequences for him, but it also has this consequence. On the night of the riot, city under curfew, he has to sneak to his job at the Holiday Inn, where he's an overnight janitor on the graveyard shift. He goes out at about 2 a.m. in the morning to take his middle of the shift break. And he goes out to where he usually stands, which is on the back of the hotel by the dumpsters on the bluff overlooking the Mississippi River. And this night there's a man there, this really tired man, about 5'7", 5'8". He is smoking a cigarette and drinking a bourbon. And the man turns around and it's Martin Luther King Jr. And he and Malcolm engage in this discussion. They have this talk about nonviolence versus violence, about what we should do now, about the whole thing. And at the end of it, Malcolm has a lot to think about. King has implored him to go back to school. King has implored him to reconsider nonviolent engagement, nonviolent protest. Malcolm has a lot to think about. A week later, Dr. King comes back to town, and Malcolm has made up his mind. You know what? You made a lot of sense, and what I did only ended in disaster. So I'm gonna follow what Dr. King, suggested. And he is walking to Dr. King to tell him this. He's approaching him on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel at 6:00 p.m. on the evening of April 4th. And as he's walking, he's looking over this way. Something catches his eye. He's not quite sure what it is. He sees the sun glinting off something in a window, and he's not sure what it is. And then in the instant that he knows what it is, it's all over. It's too late. James Earl Ray pulls the trigger, and Dr. King is dead. So for 40 years, he's lived, one, with the guilt of knowing that if I just acted, if I had just seen this half second sooner, I might have been able to save his life. And two, he's also lived with this promise that he has made to that he's made within himself, I guess, to Dr. King, we're going to try it your way. So for 40 years, he's done that. He has grown up. He's become a writer. He's become a syndicated columnist for the Chicago Post newspaper, fictional newspaper. And at this point, I always have to say, no, he is not me. Not in any regard. I mean, we share the same frustrations, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But, Malcolm's got 2 Pulitzers. I've only got 1. And he's driving a Corvette, and I'm driving an old Toyota. So, we're nothing alike. But he's become a columnist for the Chicago Post newspaper, and he's really tried to live up to the promise that he was walking toward Dr. King to make. But in the interim, he just sees the country getting crazier and crazier and more hateful and more hateful. And it comes to a head for him when there's a police shooting in Chicago, yet another unarmed African-American man, shot for no reason by police. And he writes a column lamenting this, and he gets in response yet another raft of racist emails. Now, those of us who do this for a living know that racist emails are kind of a part of the job description. It's just what happens. And we know that the best way to handle this is, there's a reason that God invented the delete button. And you thank God for his great invention, and you use his great invention, and you move on, because to do anything else is just going to make you crazy. But Malcolm, for whatever reason, can't do this one time, and he just snaps. And he writes a very angry column in response to this guy. This is a burn all the bridges, go to hell, type of column. The lead of the column, or very near the lead of the column, says, I'm sick and tired of white folks' bullshit. So that'll give you a hint of where he's coming from, okay? And, and he's bitter, he's frustrated. It's coming up on election day, and he goes into the fact that a lot of people think Barack Obama is going to be president, but if you think that, you don't know white people. There's no way they're going to vote. I mean, he's just done. He's just burning all the bridges. And he takes it to his editor, and he says, here, publish this. Editor reads it, he turns a few different colors, and he says, no, this is not going to be in the paper. Goes to his editor's boss. The editor's boss reads it and says, no. Takes it all the way up to the publisher, top of the food chain. The publisher reads it, and she says, and I quote, this will be published in my paper the day after Sarah Palin weds Jeremiah Wright on a nude beach in Jamaica. So that's a pretty definitive no. I take that as a no, not going to happen. Of course, you never know, Sarah and Jeremiah, I'm just saying, But anyway, so Malcolm, he's frustrated, he's angry, and he goes to pout. He pouts over a few beers at a local bar. And he pouts deep into the evening over a few beers at the local bar. And eventually he has one of those ideas that seems like a really good idea after you've been hoisting a few. What the hell? I don't need them to publish it. I know my boss's password into the computer system. I could go back down to the building and publish it myself. So he goes back to the building. It's about 11 o'clock at night. At 11 o'clock at night, all the reporters and the editors are pretty much gone, but the presses haven't yet run. So he goes into his boss's office, and he's typing in, and he hacks into the computer system, and he's about to publish, and he has another one of those great ideas, or one of those ideas that seems great when you've got a little liquor on your belly. What the hell, if I'm going to publish it, I might as well put it on the front page. And so it is that on election day of 2008, Malcolm's column, which shouldn't be published anywhere, is published on the front page of the Chicago Post newspaper. And all hell promptly breaks loose. But Malcolm's not around for it because Malcolm's disappeared. Nobody knows where he is. And it turns out Malcolm has been kidnapped by the White Resistance Army. Now, they call themselves an army. They are an army of two people. They are Clarence Pym, who is this large, this very large, 6'6", 400 pounds, outcast. This guy who's never really had a friend, and he's got a friend, and his friend is Dwayne McLarty. And Dwayne is this little meth freak who's just got a real hatred on. And so they're the White Resistance Army, Sergeant Clarence Pym and Captain Dwayne McLarty. And they've got this plot. They want to blow up Grant Park that night when President-elect Obama has his victory rally, and they want to blow Malcolm up with it. So that's Malcolm's day going to hell. I'll talk a little bit about the second character, and then I'll read you some. The second character is Bob Carson. Bob is in 1968, Bob is this fundamentally very decent Christian kid who is a little bit different, I guess, than other kids. He's grown up. He has seen, on television, the great civil rights marches that Dr. King has led. He's seen Birmingham. He's seen St. Augustine. He's seen Selma. And he has come up with, as a Christian kid, he wants to know, that he has the wherewithal to do what these people have done, which is to lay his body on the line in non-violently in protest of injustice. Am I strong enough to do that? Does my faith allow me to do that? Can I bear that witness like all of these other people who I so admire have done? So he wants to be involved with the civil rights movement. He ends up he has acceptance letters from Yale. He has acceptance letter from the University of Southern California. He ends up going to a small Bible college nobody's ever heard of in North Mississippi because he wants to be in the South and he wants to be engaged in the civil rights movement. And he does that. He's engaged in the civil rights movement, but he also becomes involved with this young woman. Her name, and you're going to want to remember her name is Janika Lattimore. Janika just takes my poor boy's brain and just, First Love. Anybody remember First Love and all that? She just turns his life upside down like a bag and just shakes everything out. He is head over heels, inside out, just totally, crazy about her, and she about him. I mean, it's one of those first love things. So there's a lot of, there's a passion, there's a connection between them, and they're crazy about each other. But the problem for both of them is that this relationship is unfolding in late 1967, early 1968. And those of you who remember or know anything about the 60s will probably understand when I say, in my mind, there's almost two 1960s. The early 1960s were this period of great optimism and hope. Even though terrible things happened, you had John Kennedy's assassination, you had the murders of the 4 little girls at 16th Street Baptist Church, but there was still an optimism, there was a hope, there was something in the air then. And by late 1967, early 1968, the air was beginning to become poisoned. And there was a lot more anger, there was a lot more rage. There was a fury. It's the difference between the answers, my friend, are blowing in the wind and ball of confusion. That's what the world is today. For those of you who are of age to get my musical references, that's the difference between those two 60s. And their relationship is unfolding right as the one is giving way to the other. And so from the beginning, there are difficulties in their relationships. This young African-American girl and this white kid who's never been anywhere but who's very idealistic and very gung-ho, they have difficulties in their relationship just because they've come from different worlds, and there's things that they don't quite understand about each other and about the forces that have made them. And here's where it all comes to a head. As I said, Bob has daydreamed of going on a march with Martin Luther King. He's dreamt of this like other kids his age dream of playing catch with Mickey Mantle or being Mercury 7 astronauts. He really wants to do this. And he gets his chance when he hears that there's going to be a march in Memphis in support of the sanitation workers. And he and Janika drive up to Memphis, and they are involved with this march. But as I said, the march turns into a riot. And during the course of trying to get away from the riot, from the melee, Bob is jumped by this black guy, no particular reason, just that he's white and he's handy, and it's a riot, and the guy is furious. And the guy is wailing on him, and Bob is trying to do his nonviolent thing, even though he's just getting the tar beaten out of him. And Janika, who is also a member of the same nonviolent group, takes a piece of masonry and clonks the guy upside the head. So her nonviolent witness may be a little less. Her commitment may be a little less strong than Bob's, but she probably saved Bob's life. And they jump in the car and they run back to the campus, and Bob is beat all to hell. And it's at that moment that she tells him, I think it's over between us. She dumps him. And she dumps him for reasons that I'll read to you shortly in the excerpt. But the net effect is that Bob is devastated, and he stays devastated essentially for the rest of his life. 40 years later, we meet him in 2008. Bob has become an editor for a Chicago newspaper, and he's also become a guy who finds that he feels that he has less empathy, less compassion for African American struggle than he did when he was young. His thing is, he says, okay, I was there, I was with you when there were signs on the walls that said white only, or when there was a hamburger stand that you couldn't get a hamburger at, or when there were laws that prevented you from voting. I could understand that, and I could stand with you. But when you're talking to me now about structural racism, I don't what is that? I don't understand that. And you're telling me that I should be in support of affirmative action, and doesn't affirmative action just take a job away from me or from my kid? So he's kind of he doesn't know where his empathy has gone. He doesn't know if he's just become a midlife racist. He doesn't know what it is, but he knows that something has happened. But again, this is social. This is growing older and changing. But never forget, this is also personal. That woman broke his heart. Okay, so part of what Bob feels about African American struggle is tied to what Bob feels about that woman. That just dumped him, okay? It's all kind of tied up in his head, okay? So in 2008, we come and meet Bob on election morning. Bob is puttering around his kitchen getting breakfast ready. It'll let you know what Bob's character is, or something about Bob's personality to know two things. One, he spends every New Year's Day cleaning out his closet. Two, what he's fixing for breakfast that morning is an egg whites spinach omelet. So Bob has not exactly become Mr. Excitement in his latter years. And Bob gets a phone call from his boss, and his boss says, "Hey Bob, you remember that column from our star columnist that you rejected, the one that we said would never run in this paper? It's on the front page." What? How the hell did that happen? I don't know, but the publisher is steamed, and she's called a meeting, and she wants to see you this morning at 7. Now, those of you who know anything about corporate America or business know that when the top boss calls you in for a sudden meeting at 7 a.m., is probably not to give you a promotion, okay? Is not to give you a bonus. So, Bob's got that working. He's about to go into work and face, the music for this. And then, well, that's where the excerpt picks up. So I'll read you a little bit from there. Bob stood and went about replacing the bags in the refrigerator, putting the skillet in the sink. There would be no breakfast this morning. As Bob was absorbing that minor disappointment, his telephone chirped again, this time the tone alerting him to the arrival of an email. Bob resented the slightly Pavlovian way the little device had trained him to pick it up at the ringing of a bell to see some ad for erectile dysfunction or a plea for help from a distressed Nigerian. For a brief moment, he thought of allowing the chirp to go unanswered. Didn't he have more important concerns? But in the end, he surrendered as he had known he would, picked up the phone, and clicked open his email. "A name from your past," read the subject line. Bob opened it. What he saw put him back in the chair. "Old friend, you cannot imagine my delight at running across your name while doing some research on the Post website. Well, not just your name. There are a million Bob Carsons in the world after all, but also your picture. That's what sealed it for me. Even after all these years, I'd have known you anywhere. I have always regretted the way it was left between us, the things I said to you so long ago in all my youthful self-righteousness and ideological purity. I've thought of you often and wondered what became of you. These past few months, I've been working in minority outreach for Senator Obama. I am on a plane right now and will land in Chicago at 10:30. I will be homeless for a few hours, unable to check into my room until this afternoon. I know this is criminally short notice, and I will understand if you can't do it, but if at all possible, might we have lunch today? I've missed you, Bob. I'd love to catch up with you. More than that, I'd simply love to see you again. Let me know." It was signed, Janika Lattimore. Janika Lattimore. He said it in a whisper, just to hear it being said, just to have the words on his tongue and the sound in his ear. All at once, Bob realized he had stopped breathing. He breathed. He was a trim and orderly man in wire-frame glasses, pink scalp peeking through the thin canopy of hair at the crown of his head. Once upon a time, back when his hair had fallen to below his shoulder blades, back when he was another man in another life, he had loved Janika Lattimore. Helplessly, that was how he had loved her, completely. And she had broken his heart. No, that wasn't quite right. She had not broken his heart, she had broken him. She had left him lying in pieces on a dirt road in Mississippi. And for the longest time, he had not known if or even cared if he could put himself together again. And even when he finally decided to get on with it, even when he did manage to put the pieces back together into something that vaguely resembled Robert Matthew Carson, it had never quite been the same. He felt like a piece of china glued back together by a sixth grader. The pieces didn't quite fit. The break still was visible. Bob had never loved again, never allowed himself to. There had been relationships, yes. He had even lived for a couple of years with a free-spirited painter in a crummy little apartment in Soho, and she had borne him a son he adored. But he had never married, much less immersed himself in a woman that way again. Now, he was 59 years old, and after all this time, here she was, blowing through town, blowing back into his life and wanting to get together for lunch? Bob felt anger kindling in him at the nerve of her to show up 40 years later as an email in his inbox, blithely inviting him to catch up on old times, as if what had happened had never happened, as if she had not told him that they had no future together because he was white and she was not, as if he, with an ice pack to his head and blood dripping off his chin, sitting in the back of that ambulance, had not begged her to stay, as if she had not turned away from him, literally turned away from him to be with her people. That's how she had put it in that self-consciously melodramatic way of college radicals of the 1960s for whom the revolution was a foregone conclusion. Her people. I thought I was your people too, he had said, his voice wounded and confused as the ambulance door closed on him. He had always wondered if she heard him, and if she did, if she had answered. He didn't know. The door had closed like finality, and he had never seen nor heard from her again. Then his phone had chirped, and there she was, inviting him to lunch. There was an absurdity to it that almost wrung a bitter laugh out of him. Almost. Bob glanced at his watch. It was a few minutes after 6. He needed to hurry if he was going to make the meeting. He pressed a button, and the screen on his cell phone went dark. But it was an effort just to get up out of the chair. Janika Lattimore, he said, walking down the hallway toward his bedroom. So there's Bob's day going to hell, I guess would be the short description. I want to read you one other excerpt. This is of Malcolm. Malcolm has spent a day, the captive of the white resistance army. He's been, battered around a little bit physically. But he's also just, you have to understand that in writing that column that he's already tired in a way that has nothing to do with, with physical fatigue. He was already tired. He's been beaten, and now he's also physically kind of drained, physically exhausted. So it's all coming down on him. This is the end of the day. He and his captors, or he and his captor, because Dwayne is not in the building, but he and Clarence are watching the election returns on a battery-operated computer. They're watching the live stream. They're watching a conservative news channel, which I do not identify as Fox. You may, if you choose, infer that. You may infer that if you want to. I didn't give it a name, I'm just saying. But he is just sort of, as I said, he's just sort of exhausted, and he's essentially reliving, his life and what it is that has brought him, to this strange pass. So let me read this. He closed his eyes. He hung his head. He walked the streets of Memphis again, 20 years old again, angry again, crying black power again, a gun sitting heavy in his pocket again, just waiting for some cracker, some whitey, some hunky to give him an excuse to use it. He stared at them again, convinced again that they were fundamentally different from him and that whatever they had of humanity inside them was a flame too small, too flickering, too fleeting to matter. He watched them watching him, seeing him but not seeing him at all, seeing him but really seeing whatever it was that came up in their minds when they plugged in the tape marked nigger and let it play. He watched them and knew that they were beyond redemption, and he was glad he had his gun. This was the man he had been, but then life had happened, as life will, and he had grown away from that rage, away from that unfocused fury toward a faceless them, had come to accept as true the old axiom that hatred corrodes the vessel that carries it, and this had made him a better man. He had seen 40 years pass, and in those years he had married and mourned a glorious woman, raised 2 children, and lived a celebrated life. Yet all of it had only brought him to last night and to writing an angry column that said, "I am sick and tired of white folks' bullshit." He had announced that he had given up on the idea that white people might ever be redeemed. He had told America to go to hell. It was as if he had lived those 40 years thinking he was going forward, only to find he had simply traveled in a great wide gyre to become again that angry 20-year-old walking the streets, loaded and ready. Malcolm's disappointment with his own life was matched only by his sense of estrangement from American dreams. Not only had he traveled 40 years to become again who he once was, but had not America done the very same thing? Look at all the young black men in jail or shot to death just for being black. Look at the poverty rate. Look at the unemployment rate. Look at the achievement gap. And look at these two, this ridiculous delusional pair who fancied themselves an army of redemption. This raggedy little meth addict and his giant companion whose hatred, whose burning sense of birthright stolen, whose conviction that they had been done wrong by all the forces of history and change was so palpable and deep, they might as well have stepped into this warehouse straight out of 1953, 1921, or 1878. Looking at them, how could you believe time had passed? How could you believe progress, any progress, had been made? So what good was any of it? What good were Malcolm's years of writing columns, seeking by the force of his reason and the excellence of his words to cajole and convince white America? For that matter, what good were King's speeches? What good was Malcolm X's fire? What good were the NAACP's court filings? What good were Jesse's sing-song rhymes or Stevie's brotherhood songs if at the end of it all, 40 years later, you wound up chained to a chair pleading for your life with a giant misanthrope who called you nigger in one breath, and in the next cited to you events from the legend of Michael Jordan? What good? What good? What damn good? The question covered him like ground fog on tarmac. The realization did too. Malcolm had wasted his life. It had all been for nothing. It looks like this is it. Pym's voice tried to tug Malcolm up out of himself. He did not want to come. What was the use of opening his eyes only to bear witness to some new obscenity or insanity? What was the point of being in the world if the world was only going to shit on you and disappoint you and make you feel like a goddamn fool for ever having dreamed or believed? Malcolm did not want to open his eyes. He opened them anyway. Pym was standing, his hand cupping his mouth, calling to McLarty. "Dwayne, you might want to see this." A moment later, McLarty came in, wiping his greasy hands on a greasy rag. "What's going on?" he said. "They're about to call the West Coast," said Pym. "I think this is it." Malcolm looked at the screen. He blinked. He blinked again. Obama had 207 electoral votes. McCain, 135. The white-haired anchor faced the camera. He looked drawn and sad, like a surgeon after a long night in the operating room, about to tell a mother her son has died on the table. "With results coming in from some key western states," he said, "we are now ready to make a projection. Polls are closed now in California, Washington, and Oregon, and it appears..." The screen went black. The screen went black. Malcolm caught himself straining toward the dead computer. "Fix it," he told Pym. "Battery died," said Pym with a shrug. The two of them stared at one another helplessly, silently. Then Malcolm heard it. It was a sound so faint that at first he wasn't even sure it was a sound. Wasn't sure it wasn't just his mind playing tricks on his ears. Then he saw Pym looking meaningfully at McLarty, and he knew they heard it too. Distant and dim, but real, carrying across the night and through the door of the old warehouse, a roar of delirious joy lifted from Grant Park. In that moment, something rose inside Malcolm that he had not expected and could not name. Something proud, something with gnarled roots and feathered wings. He felt unexpected tears massing behind his eyes. He felt the painful warmth of dawn breaking behind his sternum. It had happened. Holy hell, it had happened. Barack Obama had won the election. Barack Obama was going to be president of the United States. A black man, president. Holy hell. I guess that settles that, said McLarty. No turning back now. Time to do this, time to do this, time to do this. Go get this suit, Sergeant. Let's get dressed. Let's do this with style. Pym did as he was told, using his lantern to light his way to the other side of the cavernous room. McLarty lifted his own lantern, casting harsh light upon his four captives. He grinned a malignant grin. I guess you niggers and nigger lovers are happy now. You got what you wanted. Your socialist nigger was elected. Old Hussein Obama goes up on the wall next to Ronald Reagan and all those other great men. Well, I wouldn't celebrate too much if I was you, because tonight is the night white Christian America finally wakes up and starts to take its country back. Thank you. So that's a little bit from Grant Park. And I guess I could leave it there. Does anybody have any questions or give you a minute? I like that. That's actually very flattering. We need to absorb. We need to, woo! That's very flattering. Thank you. Yes, hi.
Who are the other three captives?
Who are the other three captives? I'm not going to tell you. I'm sorry? You got to read a book to, yeah. Yeah, some other captives, but I kind of skipped around that so that you wouldn't, I don't want to ruin the book for you either. Yeah. Yeah, I might. Probably. Yeah, definitely. Who else?
I have a question.
Okay.
You said you majored in English?
Yeah.
Well, today that's sort of like frowned upon in college. I hear my kids talk about that sometimes, like, oh, they're just majoring in English. How important was that with you in your writing and doing what you're doing? I know English is important. I know that. How?
I don't know if the answer I'm going to give you is going to satisfy you, because
I just want to know.
I probably, you got to understand, I went to college very early. I went to college very young. Academically, I was ready for it, but in some other ways, I probably wasn't mature enough. If I had known better, and if I'd known where life was going to go, I probably would have majored in journalism instead of English. In high school, English often meant creative writing, which is what I was looking for. In college, English means John Milton and Chaucer and Shakespeare and that whole canon. So it was a little bit of shock for me. But I think that, that said, I think that English is sort of a good fundamental, grounding for whatever else it is that you're going to do. Although, as I said, if I had it to do over again, I'd probably either a dual major or just major in journalism.
Where?
University of Southern California, in my hometown of Los Angeles. Who else? Y'all still absorbing. I like that. I just see the looks on the faces, the thoughtful, hello. Yeah.
Okay, we go. It seems to me like that English is incredible. I mean, all those authors that you mentioned, if you're an English major, if you're going to be a writer, it couldn't hurt
No, that's why I said
about these books.
it doesn't hurt at all. It doesn't hurt at all.
And to understand the actual mechanics of the English language.
It doesn't hurt at all, but I will say, and again, I'm not trying to be a contrarian, but I'm just telling you what experience has taught me. And I tell students this all the time. College is where you go to learn how to think. But in terms of being a writer, in studying Chaucer and Twain and all the rest of these people certainly did not hurt me. But the thing about being a writer is you become a writer when you start writing, and you become a professional when you get paid for it. And so it is entirely possible, to do it and have a very respectable career without having any of that under your belt. I mean, I'm just saying, it's one of those.
As a human being,
As a human being, it's better. Yes, as a human being, it's much better.
I was looking
I know. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, with a twice weekly deadline,
Mm-hmm.
you have difficulty, knowing our world, I doubt it, but you have difficulty coming up with ways to say what you want to say in the right amount of words?
It's something that you learn. The thing about column writing is that it's not like any other type of writing. When I became a columnist 20 years ago, I figured it was going to be fairly simple because I'd done so many other things. I'd written news stories, I'd written reviews, I'd written bad novels, I'd written a bunch of things, and I figured that writing a column was going to be just another thing. But column writing is its own thing. The trick is that there's this economy of language that you have to learn. You have to be able to do a lot of things in the context of about 625, 650 words. And it can't look like you were rushing, and it has to look like you made every point you wanted to make, plus you had a time to stop and make a joke along the way. And so,
Like a short story.
yeah, it's really,
Sometimes to fit
yeah,
everything in.
it's really it's really a hard trick to learn. I mean, even if you have been an accomplished writer in other forms, it's kind of a difficult thing to learn. And the sad thing is, I don't know if the lessons you learn transfer easily to most other things. It is its own thing, But once you master it, then you're good. But it takes a minute to master. Hi.
Hi. So, have you ever turned in that angry column?
Nah. Have I ever turned in that angry column? No. I've never turned in that angry column. Unlike Malcolm. See, Malcolm's older than me, and he's richer than me, so he wanted to blow up his career. But plus, I've never really felt that. The thing that Malcolm does is he does what he is angry has been done to him, which is essentially to look at another group of people as a monolith. As all of you are bad, or all of you are good, or all of you are whatever. That's the mistake that Malcolm makes in that column. Not that some of his points, some of his points are good, but the thing is he tars everybody with the same brush, and so I've never been tempted to do that. I've been upset, but I've never had that kind of frustration. I will tell you a funny story though. My assistant was when she first became my assistant, she was reading some of the more hateful emails, and she used to send me notes like, one of them was, "I am just vibrating with anger," and the other one was, "I don't know how you don't hate white people." And I sent her back a note, said that would mean I'd have to hate you, wouldn't it? Because, but she's really, I explained to her. I have to explain to her about once a year. I've been black a little longer than you have, so so you kind of learn how to deal with this stuff. But it's kind of new to her, and a lot of it, she just has real issues with it, which I actually kind of, it's not good for her, but it actually makes me feel, okay, I'm not just crazy. I'm not crazy because here's a nice, middle-aged, white woman about my age and and she thinks that some of these folks are nuts. So I find that sort of very supportive, I guess is the best way to put it. Yes.
I find your column very rational and reasonable, and I'm wondering what you attribute that balance to in your background, because most columnists are not, in my view.
Well, thank you. I don't really know. I get asked that a lot, and I really don't know how to answer it. Mom taught me to be a decent person, and college taught me to think, and I guess that's as close as I can come to an answer for you. I'm going to have to come up with a better answer for that one because I get that a fair amount.
No, why don't you create a mom?
Okay. Yes.
How closely does Malcolm's experiences in the 1960s parallel your own experiences in the 60s?
Not at all. Malcolm, as I said, Malcolm's about 10 years older than I am. In 1968, he's a college student of 20 years. In 1968, I turned 11. Martin Luther King died. I didn't even know who he was. True story. I don't know if any of you remember. There was a group of singers that called the King family, and for those of you who don't remember, this was the most white bread group of singers. I'm serious. These guys made Lawrence Welk look like James Brown. They were just like, And when I heard that this is a true story. When I heard that somebody named King had died, I was kind of happy. I was like, why is everybody sad? One of the people died. Great. Maybe I won't have to watch their TV specials anymore. My father was not happy with me that day. We'll just say that. My parents are like, oh my God. I'm like, yes, the king is dead. Not a bright kid sometimes. Yes, young lady.
So when you write, do you write like from beginning to end, or what's your process when you write?
Yeah, I mean, you mean from? You mean in one sitting, or?
Books, do you start from the beginning and write it all the way to the end, or do you write it like
I don't know any other way to do it. Yeah. Yeah, you start at the beginning and you work your way to the end. You're talking about the novels, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you start a novel and you have essentially maybe a few plot points and a basic idea of where this is going to go, but the rest of it is you sit down and you find out what's going to happen pretty much the same time as your characters do.
Okay.
That for me has been the best. I've seen writers, and I used to be one of them, who tried to plot everything out ahead of time, and that never really worked for me. I like it better just knowing have a basic idea who the characters are, and maybe some of the important plot points, and then let's just see what happens. And by being open to that, I've just seen stuff happen in my books that I didn't really expect. There's a scene in my book, Before I Forget, where this young lady, she's 19 years old, she's a teenage mother by a young man who's not the most responsible father in the world, and she shows up pregnant again. And I was like shocked, girl, seriously? 'Cause I didn't expect that to happen. I literally did not expect that to happen. I literally didn't expect that to happen, And then the girl showed up pregnant. I was like, okay, well, let's see what happens after this. I watch hardly any cable news, and even less local TV news. Other than that, I will go to CNN.com, but you've got to kind of pick through the garbage to find some headlines. LATimes.com, MiamiHerald.com. I read the Washington Post, New York Times, Slate, The Root. There's various websites that I go to. But I just try to be very picky about who I trust for fact, because the thing about being a journalist, being a columnist, is that all you have is your reputation, all you have is your credibility. And I don't want to, damage mine following somebody who didn't have their own facts together. So I'm very picky about that. Miami Herald is my employer, but the column is syndicated through a Tribune content agency, and they syndicate it to another couple hundred and change newspapers. Deadlines have a way of focusing attention. I think left on our own devices, a lot of us as writers would prefer to spend 7 hours a day contemplating our navels, and dreaming and being up in sort of airy fairyland or whatever. But when you're doing this for a living and when copy is needed by X time, it really has a way of clarifying. For me, it wasn't newspaper journalism. It was something even harsher. It was news radio. In news radio, you've got a deadline every hour for 8 hours. And you've got to put a newscast together at the top of the hour. Matter of fact, before the top of the hour, because the editor has to take a look at it. So there's not a whole lot of time for fooling around. There's not a whole lot of time for navel gazing or trying to be cute or I don't feel it today. I don't feel yeah. Stephen King. Stephen King is like the first. Larry McMurtry. I like well, he's gone now, but I used to like Tom Clancy. And I have to qualify that because Tom Clancy's not a great writer or wasn't a great writer, but he was a great storyteller. I mean, he could spin a great story. He was never a great writer. He was very much a nuts and bolts type of writer. Who else do I like fiction? I used to like Joseph Wambaugh. I was really big on Wambaugh. I haven't read any of his stuff in a long time. Who else? Fiction. That's what's about. I'm sure I'm missing somebody. I'm probably missing a bunch of people, but Stephen King is like, numero uno. Oh, there's this lady, I'm blanking on her name. She wrote the novel Doc, and she has a new novel called Epitaph, Mary Doria Russell. I love her stuff. And I've only read one book of his, but James McBride has a book called Song Yet Sung, which I read for the first time maybe 3-4 years ago, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. Oh, and also, now that I'm rolling, huh? John Steinbeck for The Grapes of Wrath, and then there's Herman Wouk, because I love historical novels. His two books on the Second World War are just brilliant. Winds of War and War and Remembrance are two of my favorites. Yeah. Yes? What columnists do I respect? I got to think. I respect everybody. Actually, I like Kathleen Parker. I'm trying to think of people who are working today because I had a great respect for Dave Barry's stuff, But in terms of people who work, I like Kathleen Parker, even though we probably don't. I know we don't agree politically on a lot of stuff, but I think she's honest, and I think she's intellectually honest, which is the problem for a lot of folks. A lot of people are not very intellectually honest, so I like her. Oh, and Kathy Schultz. not Kathy. I'm blanking on her last name. I swear, getting mature is it's a heck of a thing. Connie Schultz. Thank you very much. Connie Schultz. I love her writing as well. She's an excellent columnist. The motivation for the book was that I really wanted to deal not just with race, because this is the first thing I've written that's directly about race. I mean, Before I Forget is a story about fathers and sons. I mean, race impacts it, but it's a story about fathers and sons. Freeman is a love story, basically, although it's set in the context of right after slavery. This is the first thing I've written that directly addresses race. And one of the things I wanted to get at was how crazy, absurd, and just completely nuts this country has become with regard to racial dialogue. It's just completely insane. Exhibit A is, I mentioned a moment ago, I've got to explain to Chris Christie that Black Lives Matter is not a terrorist group. You think that, before you call something a terrorist group, they'd have to do something creating terror, but that's just me. But it's just like the dialogue in this country has become insane. So that's kind of, it's absurd, and that's kind of what I wanted to deal with in the book. One critic noted that the sections that take place in 1968 are kind of serious, but the sections that take place in 2008, there's sort of this tone of satire to them. That was very much intentional, because that's kind of how I see where we are now. So that's how you get, Clarence, the 6'6", 400-pound guy who hates black people and loves Michael Jordan. That kind of thing. I wanted to get at that, just sort of the insanity of it. Now, as to my pet peeve, aspiring writers, you just walk into a trap. Don't aspire, right? I always tell that to the gentleman spoke to me earlier, said his daughter was an aspiring writer. I didn't jump on him because he was talking about his daughter, so I said, okay, I'll leave that alone. But if his daughter had said it, I would have said, stop it, don't aspire, right? There's no such thing as an aspiring writer, okay? If you're writing, then you're a writer, okay? Now, you can aspire to be published. I feel you on that, but as far as aspiring, there's no such thing as aspiring writer. As I was explaining to the lady here a moment ago, writing is one of the few professions that I know of where you don't need a certificate on the wall. You don't need a certain educational background. All you need is the talent to do it and be able to turn it out, on time. So, there are two types of writers. There's unpublished and published. Professional and non-professional. That's it. So don't aspire. Learn everything you can about your craft. Read every day. Write every day. Do this to the exclusion of other stuff. You're going to have to surrender some stuff. I don't know what's important to you in your life. I was talking to a young man. He's a kid. He was talking about he wants to write professionally. Okay. Do you do this every day? Well, most days, but sometimes I play video games. Well, hey, I love video games too. I got my PlayStation. I got my NBA 2K. I love video games too. But the writing has to have priority. The young lady here asked about, you're getting a kick out of this, aren't you? The young lady here asked about writing process, and one of the things that I neglected to mention in writing a novel, set yourself a goal, a non-breakable, non-negotiable goal of word count or page count, however you want to do it, every day. Birthday, Sunday, forgive me, Lord, Sunday, Christmas, whenever. That you're writing. Stephen King, in his book On Writing, which I would recommend that you get if you haven't read it, it's the best book on writing that I've ever read. But one of the things that he says is that he does 2,000 words a day. I have another job, so I can't do without 2,000 words a day. But on this last novel and on this one, the novel I just finished, and on this one, 1,000 words a day, about 3 hours in the morning, and you've got to commit to that. So you got any other questions? I love beating up aspiring writers. Stop aspiring. Sit your butt down and write. Yes.
In reference to Grant Park, how might the story be different if the lead character were a woman?
If Malcolm were a woman?
Yes.
I have no idea, because I haven't really thought about that. That'd be interesting. There were not a lot of women out there that I know of, throwing those Molotov cocktails on Beale Street that day. It'd be kind of a difficult thing, but I hadn't really given that a lot of thought.
One thought is if anyone, if you haven't seen this column from 9/11.
9/11, yeah.
The day after that's a wonderful column. But my question was going to be, is there a favorite column that's in this book that I Or one that you've written other than that?
Probably my favorite column, I think one of the best columns I ever wrote, which actually nobody read because I think it appeared right after the Columbine shooting, if I recall correctly. It was written the day before and it appeared the day after. So I don't think anybody ever actually read it, but there's a column that I did on the 4th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, which I think just for writing is one of the best things I ever did. There's a piece I did on the 20th anniversary of the Kennedy King assassinations, which I don't think is in there. Matter of fact, I know isn't in there. And there's a piece I did on, for some reason, anniversaries bring it out of me, but there's a piece in there on the 20th anniversary of Elvis Presley's death, which I was just very proud of the writing on that. So, yes.
The Jimmy Carter one.
Oh, the Jimmy Carter one on faith? Well, thank you. That's not in there, but thank you.
He was diagnosed.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. Yeah. Yes.
I've been a long time reader of your columns, and I really admired the way you handle race. But the way that I first became aware of you, and which I'm eternally grateful for, is the way that you wrote about LGBT issues.
Thank you.
Before it was the in thing to do, too. And I was just wondering how you came to have this understanding about LGBT issues.
Well, there's two things. One, I grew up watching Donahue in the 80s. And, I realize now that this was a setup, but back then, when they'd have, people on talking about LGBT issues, you'd have some gay person on and they'd be like, very nicely presented and, talking, very reasonably or whatever. And then you'd have the opposition on. These people are like foaming from the mouth and, hanging off the chandeliers and just really nuts. It's like, okay, I want to be with those folks, So that was kind of an easy call for me, from the very beginning. But the other thing was, frankly, when I look at other people's freedom movements, whether we're talking about women, whether we're talking about LGBT, whether we're talking about, whomever, I always look at it through the prism of being African American, because that has taught me, the particulars change, the particulars are different, but a lot of the dynamics of oppression remain the same, whether we're talking about women, whether we're talking about blacks, whether we're talking about gays, whether we're talking about Jews, whether we're talking about Hispanics. A lot of the dynamics are very similar. And that, I think, has sort of helped me to have an insight, into other people's struggles that maybe, would not be there, if that makes any kind of sense to you. Who else? Hi. What happens is you sort of take, in fiction, you take stuff from life and then add other stuff to it. The question from which most good fiction springs is what if? So even with regard to Grant Park, you look at it and you say, okay, I always handle it this way, but what if somebody else took the same situation and did the other thing? So that, that's, it all springs from there. You'll read the email that sets Malcolm off, and I always tell people that email is an amalgam of 1,000 emails that I've received. Every line in there is from somewhere. So when you read it and you're going, nobody could say, this is what folks say. Every line in there comes from somewhere that I've read. So, in that sense, the life informs fiction. When we were first, the internet was first coming up and this whole idea of, email and being able to respond directly to people's comments, there was this idealistic idea that we're going to have this sort of Jeffersonian, high-tone debate. And particularly back when more of them were anonymous, what we've actually discovered is that a lot of us are not, maybe not most of us, maybe the good people are off busy doing good things, but there's a lot of us who have a lot of time on their hands who are not very good people, and it's not just the racial stuff. I've become increasingly aware and concerned about how much of this kind of stuff is gender related. If you look at what women are facing right now, particularly women reporters, Ashley Judd on Twitter, rape and death threats. It's just, the internet, for all the wonderful things it's done, the internet has sort of empowered what I call, this sort of cheap terrorism, where I can sit in my basement and never get out of my pajamas and terrify you, and ruin you, and it's over trivial stuff. Steve Blake of the LA Lakers, was of the LA Lakers then, maybe 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, he misses a key shot in the game, three-point shot that would have, sent the game into overtime or taken us to the playoffs or whatever it was, I forget. And, everybody's upset and everybody, talking about it, whatever. And then his wife starts getting death threats on Twitter. You know, first of all, death threats over a basketball game. Second of all, his wife didn't put up the shot. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, levels of stupid, you know, that the internet, I think, has just really, you know, I think they were always there, but the internet has sort of really empowered a lot of people to do stupid stuff. Back in the 90s, you know, before there was, you know, internet like we have it now, you'd get this kind of stuff, but you could tell right away that it was stupid because it's scrawled in crayon on the margins of the newspaper. Okay, you know, people. I don't want to gross anybody out, so I won't go any further than that. But people would send you stuff which would have physical clues to it that these people are not right. And right now, you know, when an online comment, unless they're doing the all caps and 12 exclamation points, you've actually got to read it to discover that these people aren't screwed on right.
My question to you is, given your past experience, would you consider now moving the conversation forward as a columnist and offering solutions that you too can support in an equally eloquent way?
Well, two things. One, I've never considered myself objective. I think objectivity is sort of this false, you know, this false standard that no human being can really reach. I try to consider myself fair, which is a different thing. And in terms of solutions, yeah, I've been trying to point the column more in the last, say, 7 or 8 years toward that. I did a series of columns called What Works, which was focused on strategies for improving educational and life outcomes for at-risk African-American young people. I'm doing a series now called What Can I Do, which is about solutions to police brutality. So I've tried to move very much into that realm. What I've come to understand, I've been doing this for 20 years now, the thing I've come to understand is, okay, if you've got this megaphone where you reach 30 million people in a week, you know, it's all well and good to use it for beating up Donald Trump and Ben Carson, and that's fun, don't get me wrong. But I think you're also morally obligated to use it to try to find some kind of, you try to offer some solutions, try to come up with a way forward. So I'm very much in that frame of mind right now. Well, I think sometimes if you use opposites, they can illuminate, you know, one another. So you know, to that degree, yeah. I think Sam brings out some stuff about Ben brings out some stuff about Sam that would be hard to illustrate otherwise. It's good to have Ben in that particular novel as a foil for Sam, because you know it allows him to be more Sam, if that makes any sense to you. Who else?
I got one more question. So I just want to know, like, how would you go about, or what do you think is necessary to engage more African American youth into reading?
I think we need to and this is for African American youth and frankly for youth in general, I think we need to find books that speak to them. You know, the things that speak to their experience, things that speak to you know, their fears and their wants and their desires. I don't know enough about young people's literature to know, you know, where those books are, whether or not they exist, but I know that is what has to happen. They do. Okay, so we know that they do. I will also tell you this, you know, one of the things that I think we tend to overlook, particularly with boys, is comic books. And I say this as a long time, you know, that was my first reading. You know, they asked me who my favorite author was, and I didn't list, but if anybody asked who the most influential author on me was, I always say Stan Lee. Stan Lee was number one. That was the first writer that I read that I remember consciously trying to imitate. You know, and I think that a lot, you know, that stuff, you know, most people don't know this, but if you can read a comic book, you can read a high school or college text, because the vocabulary is that deep, is that dense. You know, one of my sons got in trouble with a teacher once because she told him to do a book report, and he did a book report on Incredible Hulk number 167. And she called me in. I went in there, but I took her a list of words from the first page of that book, and one of the words was pariah, the other was sepulchral, thank you. I told you, getting mature, stuff just goes, man. You know, pariahs, that word, you know, a bunch of other words in the first page, and she let him alone. You know, because these were words that were far beyond what he would have found in any of the books that she wanted him to read. So, you know, I'd suggest looking at that as well. That's another possible avenue. Throw in one thing, sure.
As a teacher for 33 years, the one thing is modeling too. I hate to say that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It's
so many parents don't read, and then they expect their kids to read.
That's very true. That's very true.
Folks, I don't want to keep our writer up too late.
Because you got to catch a plane first thing in the morning.
But thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
So much for sharing with us.